Hello, and welcome to another episode of Philosophical Bones. My guests this week are Keith, my co-host on Nerdy Bones.
Hello.
And Keith's co-host on Rufus the Villain's True Crime Corner, Josh.
Yo, yo.
And so this is question 7 this week, and the question this week is there such a thing as the multiverse? And I want Keith to start this one out first.
Okay, so for me, I think it's a really interesting topic because a lot of stuff that I looked into and read is like, okay, so there's a million trillion possibilities for any, like, there's been an infinite number of us sitting right here doing this. There's been an infinite number of us sitting right here talking about this subject and talking about an infinite number of conversations. There's like any idea that you've ever had in your mind. In the multiverse, we've sat here and done this an infinite amount of times. So that's
Just with a slight variance.
Well, it's exactly, that's what the multiverse means, is like we've been here in an infinite amount of times and infinite carnations of ourselves doing this. So you get what I'm saying?
Just with slight differences.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if that's the theory on it, anyway.
Well, that's my understanding of the multiverse. Is there's an infinite amount of situations being recreated every single time.
Yeah, and when I think of multiverses, for instance, I think of like Sliders,
Yes,
the TV
yes.
show Sliders, where they were always sliding from different world to different world, just with a slight variance. You know, maybe in one like you're like a serial killer, another one you're like the president of the United States, and another one you cured cancer. And another one, you're just a piece of shit, or whatever, just some regular guy.
Well, where my mind goes is like I use the word "and" or "the," and that's the different. Like I said, "and" we're talking about this, or this is the topic we're talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Is like there's so many differentiations of reality.
Yeah,
There's an infinite amount of. And the studies that I've done, an infinite amount of realities.
Yeah.
There's like anything that you can think of has happened.
yeah,
Like even if you weren't there, some version of you did that.
yeah. It's kind of a nice thought, I guess.
So are you talking more about parallel dimensions then?
I think I would be. Yeah. Because like it could be like us sitting here right now, but Josh is right there. And Nick is right there, but in some other version, Nick is right there, and Josh is right there, and there's a different cord, and there's a different device. You know, like it's
and in a different version, we're at Nick's house instead of
exactly.
I like that.
And that's where my mind goes to it when we talk about the multiverse, because there's an infinite amount of possibilities to any scenario.
I always think about Fringe, which is a really good depiction of that, by the way. They essentially create this window and they're able to go back and forth, and there's essentially other versions of themselves, just little variations, like, you know, one has red hair, one has blonde hair, you know, things like that, you know, like
Small changes.
you know, like one lady's in the military, one's, you know, an at-home mom, stuff like that. So,
Well, and then like, not to go off on a tangent, because I really want to get into what you have put together, but like Marvel and DC has what they call their multiverse.
Yeah.
And there's just so many different incarnations of a story. And like that's not really getting into the actual question for Philosophical Bones tonight, but there's so many different type of things in like your comic book universe that are like, oh, this is what happened in this timeline, this is what happened in this timeline. That's how we get to have movies and comic books, because like this is that universe and this is this universe.
Yeah.
Do you follow?
Definitely,
Do you follow?
yeah. I get it.
So I'm really excited to listen to Josh's research tonight, because like I have to really put something on the line right now that our Nerdy Bones, Philosophical Bones, and True Crime Corner has really been set to a new standard for what Josh did on Al Capone. And like if anybody listened to the last Nerdy Bones episode about Harry Houdini, we've definitely taken a complete turn. So do you want to get into what you wrote?
Without further ado.
Thank you. I appreciate the support. It really means a lot, especially from you guys.
On air fist pump.
So, I mean, I know that Nick is a big proponent of proof and evidence.
Yes.
You know, so
Yes.
when
I want to
we-
believe.
when we did this question, like I tried to do a little bit of research and find like some scientific basis, you know, or like some theories that have different suggestions for, you know, what is really out there as far as the multiverse. And so I found a lot of interesting things, you know, but putting aside, you know, the parallel dimensions and things, when we talk about a multiverse, like we're really talking about multiple universes.
Well, you brought up earlier when I was the brain theory is what it's called, membrane theory, and I actually know something about this. Membrane theory is actually the idea of the creation of the universe. It's membranes fluctuating and touching each other, and when they touch each other, that's where the Big Bang came from. Like two membranes actually touched each other and created a flux is the word that I forget the guy's name. He's like this real famous physicist that you might have seen. He's got like long hair and he's Japanese. Michikaku, yes.
Yeah.
And so basically it's the idea is different realities fluctuating and touching each other. And when they touch each other, there's bangs.
Oh.
You know, like that's... do you follow?
Yeah, no, actually, that was the theory I was thinking of on multiverses.
It's called membrane theory.
Yeah.
So like the whole thing is it's like the universe before we knew of existence. It was like just this fluctuation of brains, membranes, and they would touch each other and flux and have a creation event.
Yeah.
Where did the membranes come from?
Who knows, man?
It's another question for another day.
That sounds like a culmination of a few theories that I've read. But yeah, you know, so for me, I kind of just had to break it down into smaller terms, you know. So I started thinking about our universe, and you know, just the general size for me is pretty hard to grasp. So I was listening to a podcast that I like. It's called Ask a Spaceman by Paul Sutter. He's an astrophysicist at Ohio State University.
Which is a great show.
It's a really awesome show. He takes questions from listeners. He talks about black holes and all kinds of cool cosmological stuff. If you're into that kind of thing, I highly recommend it. So I was listening to his, you know, and so when I was thinking about our universe, you know, and the possibility of other universes, this is kind of where it led me. So go on a little astronomy tangent.
Do your
with
thing,
me,
brother.
do.
Do your
if you
thing,
will.
brother.
So
Please do.
you know, so when we're standing on the ground, if we look up, you know, we generally think of space as being really far away. But if you were actually able to get in your car and drive straight up at normal freeway speeds, it would take you about an hour to get to space.
Oh, shit. Never knew that.
Yeah. So, you know, and so the distance from the Earth to the sun is about 8 light minutes. So
Okay.
when, you know, when a photon leaves the sun, it takes 8 minutes to travel to the Earth.
Okay.
So, you know, when we're talking about light speed and distance, and when we say light years, you know, it's distance, not time. So
Yeah.
it's the amount of time that a light takes to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Right. So if we, you know, go out a little bit, we think about the closest star to us. The closest star to us is Proxima Centauri. It's 4 light years away.
So its light takes 4 years to get here.
Yes. So the light that we see coming from Proxima Centauri was given 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like seeing back in time.
Right.
That's really what it is. You look up in the sky. We're looking in the past.
Absolutely. And so our fastest probe, which is the Voyager probe, goes 37,000 miles per hour. Okay. So that thing is booking. Like that's, you know, but that's no people, that's no food, right? It's basically a
It's machine-
satellite with a
Didn't
rocket
it-
engine on
What
it.
didn't
So
it just recently reach interstellar space?
I think so. Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yep. So, you know, so it's not pointed at Proxima Centauri, but that's the fastest thing we make. And if we pointed at Proxima Centauri 4 light years away, it would take 80,000 years to get there.
Yeah.
So, you know, and so there are 300 million stars in our galaxy. They're all spaced approximately about that far apart. And so, our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, is in a group conveniently called the local group. And so the Milky Way galaxy is about, let's see here. Yes, it's 100,000 light years is the width of our galaxy.
Of the Milky Way galaxy.
The Milky Way.
That's just the width.
You think about it like traveling. If you were to be able to travel the speed of light, it would take you 100,000 years.
100,000 years to get from one end to the other. That's fucking ridiculous. Think about, like, my big thing is to think about how big space is.
Right.
I don't mean to derail.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's the thing is, like, my little human peon brain, like, I really only think of things in like a horizontal plane. Like when I think of something, 300,000 light years away or whatever, I think of it, straight that way. But space goes in all directions.
Yeah.
360
That's one thing we
degrees.
don't think about when it comes to like watching like shows and stuff. Is like the 360 axis, I guess, of travel.
Yep.
Yeah.
We always think of it just as like a linear thing. Like when it comes to like Star Trek, for instance, like watching that show.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're always like, oh, they're just going, they're linearly traveling.
Well, then you look at the film. You look at like when they put the TV shows out. Like the ship is like flat.
Yeah.
It's not like this. You guys can't see me, but I'm doing angles.
It's not vertical.
Yeah, like the ship is always flat.
Yeah.
But that speaks to that.
Well, one thing I want to mention too, not to cut you off at all, but the distance between galaxies is actually pretty massive. Like if we were to reach the end of the Milky Way and try to travel to another galaxy, it's like probably hundreds of light years in between.
Yes, and it's constantly expanding too,
Yeah.
so it's always getting farther away. Yeah. And so our galaxy is in a group which we conveniently call the local group. And so the local group is in a larger cluster, and this cluster is part of what we call the cosmic web. And so that's basically the entire group of galaxies that we can see in the observable universe, right? So regarding light speed, we know that the universe is about 13 and some billion years old, right? So we do some math, circumference and all that, and we figure out that the universe is about 90 billion light years across.
Wow.
That's fucking insane.
Wasn't it just wasn't it just recently they photographed like the furthest object ever observed?
I didn't see that.
Was it Ultima Thule? No.
I don't know. It might have been. I don't know. It was probably like 9 billion light years away or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It was just, and the photo they show was like pretty much just a dot.
Yeah. Well, they're doing a lot of exoplanet studies, and the way they do that a lot of times is they find the star, and they can't actually see the planet, but they see the difference in the light when it goes in front of the star.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I know
that's-
exactly what you're talking about.
That's how they can like determine if it's a solar system or not.
Well,
and all
you can see the fluctuation in the light, which actually determines a gravitational force around that light.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, and that's the thing is
We're
the
fucking
universe
nerds on this show.
is always expanding. And so, Ask a Spaceman, Paul Sutter, he does a really good job. He describes it as sort of, I don't want to steal his analogy, but I guess I am. So it's kind of
wrong
like
with that. It's just paying homage, dude.
if you imagine a beach ball, right? So we're all living on this beach ball. Okay, so it's a two-dimensional world, right? You can travel from point A to point B on the beach ball, right? I can paint different galaxies on the beach ball.
Yeah.
You can travel from the one galaxy to another, right? And the beach ball is always expanding, right? So it doesn't necessarily, it's not infinite, right? It's finite, but it's not boundless, right? Because then you have someone with a pump, right? Pumping up the beach ball,
Yeah.
right? And so it's always expanding.
Yeah. Well, you look at the sun. The sun is always expanding, and they say in like 3 or 4 billion years, I think the sun will
Become a dwarf.
well, it'll encapsulate Earth.
Yeah.
And Earth will be destroyed.
Well, one of the things I saw is it'll actually eventually it'll become a dwarf star, to where its gravitational pull will bring everything together.
yeah.
And I don't mean to derail what you're talking about,
Not at all.
but it basically will everything will compress, and the one thing I got something silly here to say,
Yeah.
but I've been reading the new Superman, and he quote unquote, like, there's an old school thing from Superman that there's a key to the Fortress of Solitude, and he went to a white dwarf star and literally did this and grabbed material and brought it back and made a key.
Yeah.
And the key
It's pretty much the same thing with Thor's hammer.
basically,
Yeah.
but he basically made a key that weighs blah 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 tons, blah 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 blah. And so he's the only one that can lift it.
Yeah.
Because of the density. And what I'm getting at is like the density of a star once it starts to compress and lose its gas, because like there's still physical material there, and it starts to compress and get what's the sun's like more than 1 million times the size of Earth or something like that.
Oh yeah.
And then imagine that density compressing down. I realize I'm not staying on course with what we were talking about, Josh, but
No, that's I love astronomy. All that stuff is very relevant. It actually reminds me of an episode. Not to go on another tangent, but
tangents are good.
Yeah. Ask a Spaceman. He does a really awesome episode on black holes, basically about how anything can become a black hole.
Oh, okay.
So there's a mathematical equation. It's called the short shield radius, basically, where if you can take something and condense it down small enough below a certain radius, the gravitational pull becomes greater. The escape velocity necessary becomes greater than the speed of light. So then it's impossible to escape. So it becomes a black hole.
It was kind of like the when people were turning on the particle accelerator. Which one was it?
I know what you're talking about.
In Switzerland.
Yeah.
And they're actually worried about creating a black hole. You're just like, no.
He's like, no.
But that's
not
like,
going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
because like the speed of light is essentially the speed limit for the universe.
Yeah.
Nothing can go faster.
Well, they also say if we could be able to pull harness the energy of a black hole, we'd have an infinite source of energy.
Well, I mean, and the reason that it wouldn't turn into a black hole, like I said, is because it takes something of a massive size. Like you have to reduce the size by such a magnitude.
Well, there's a lot of mass. There's
magnitudes and magnitudes of 10. Like we're talking like the sun down to like the size of a beach ball or something.
And so that's pardon the pun, an astronomical amount of gravity.
Yeah, but anyway, to go back to my beach ball, my beach ball analogy, you say aha, but this beach ball, I see it expanding into 3-dimensional space.
Okay.
Right. So what is it expanding into? Well, I'm glad you asked.
What is it expanding into?
What is it expanding into?
So that takes us to our multiverse theory.
Yes.
So there is a theoretical physicist at Princeton, and it's basically, his name is Paul Steinhardt. And so it's basically his job to explain these things and figure out why the universe is the way it is.
Okay.
And so they have always had trouble with how uniform.
That's what I call a science breath.
Right. When we look out into the universe, like I said, the stars are basically more or less evenly spaced, right? So everything is all nice and spread out. Like there's no fluctuations in fields or like warp space or anything like that. Everything's nice and even. So they could never figure this out because the Big Bang Theory says that things should be sporadic and all over the place, variations and random. Exactly. And so one of my favorite, most plausible theories, I think, is the cosmological patch or the multiverse. And so essentially, it uses the math of the early graphs and the models of the universe. And so you have these spots of rapid expansion, but then you also have like smooth patches where everything's nice and even. And so each patch of these has patches within and patches within those patches. And so the space between the patches actually grows equal to or greater than the speed of light from everything that I've seen.
Okay, that makes sense. That's like, what do they mean by patch? What does that mean? Like, is it just like what's visible?
It's basically like a pocket, right? So if you think of like bubbles, right? So there's essentially like growth spurts, right? So, So that's like, instead of everything being all even, like what we can see, if you think about the broader universe, right? Like just what we can see happens to be nice and even, but it's not all like that.
Right. Well,
right.
Well, you think of like the Big Bang, which is what they call the singularity, to where everything expanded from one point. And it's like they say, what's the whole thing is the universe started like as a point of like the head of a pen.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like all existence, all matter was like at the head of a pen.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then just expanded.
Everything was like so super concentrated.
Yeah.
It had to explode.
And that's where you get the brain theory from, is like there's just so much going on that like, yeah, it just kind of blows my mind because of like, okay, so I actually saw like the mathematical equation for the speed of the universe. But the whole thing is there has to be something at the end of that. That there has to be like the way I picture.
You're talking about entropy.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you're talking about like at the edge, sort of like if we
The
go back
edge.
to the beach ball analogy, right? Like the edge of the beach ball,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Well, so that's the thing. Like, you know, all of these equations sort of led them into, like, if you think of it as like a whirlpool, like, or like a lake with different whirlpools in it, right? So you have like all these sort of interconnected like space-time like pockets, basically, right? So all these theories checked out in the math, right? But that's not what we see when we look out in the universe, right?
Oh.
Everything is all very uniform and stuff like that.
That's one of the best analogies I've ever heard, is like a whirlpools in a
Yeah,
lake.
exactly.
No, I didn't heard that before. That really like kind of registers with me.
Yeah.
And
Right. And so then they determined that we actually live in one of these pockets.
Oh.
And so, you know, and so they're sort of like greater expanding, will never catch up to the other pockets because they're moving too fast.
Right.
You know, and so that's sort of one theory for the multiverse, is that each one of these pockets is a different, you know, little universe, and they're so far apart, you know, due to quantum theory and things like that, regarding how physics, you know, and gravity and things changes like that. They could be completely different. Laws of gravity and physics and everything could be just completely different in each one of these pockets.
That's really interesting because one of the things I've actually seen is like, say like on a random planet, they could subsist on like nitrogen or like they could the organisms on whatever planet could completely, because we're carbon based.
Well, so from what I've read, the little bit that I know, like it's essentially, you know, they were very sneaky when they set up the table of elements, right? Like everything on the table of elements kind of like coincides. The columns all sort of interact with each other, right? And so as far as life-based organisms, there's really only two kinds that we know of.
On Earth.
Well, no. So everything on Earth is carbon, right? And so then as far as regarding elements that you can make in the table of elements regarding, you know, molecules for proper life, like really silicon is really the only other
Silicon,
one
yes,
that
absolutely.
that works.
Well, because
So
we are silicon based.
we're carbon.
We're carbon based.
Oh, I thought silicon had something to do with us, but I apparently have that wrong.
Well, and there's also a theory out there that if we were to meet alien life, that they would be so drastically different from what we are, we wouldn't even know what to make of them.
it wouldn't even be what we consider life.
Exactly.
It wouldn't even be what we consider
Exactly.
life.
Yep. And actually, Ask a Spaceman, he does a really awesome show on aliens, basically sort of, you know, comparing it to a car crash, essentially. So he talks about how, you know, car crashes happen every day, but, you know, you don't necessarily get into a car crash even though they happen every day. So if you think about that, like on the broader spectrum of the universe, right, like as far as life on planets, right, like it's out there, but it just doesn't happen right next to you all the time.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So-
Okay.
Like, you know, one of the big things, like what you just brought up, like, okay, so the mathematically life is probable. That's the one thing. Like, mathematically life is probable considering how many planetary bodies that are out there. They probably function on a different set of rules, but they're probably so far away on average that that's probably why that we don't have contact.
Yeah.
They're just
Right. Well,
so physically far away.
Yep, exactly. You know, like our galaxy is, you know, what we say, like 300 million stars.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, first of all, probability. Secondly, like they have to be pointed in our direction. Again, space is, you know, like it's a sphere, you know, like it goes in all directions. It's not flat. So, like, why would they necessarily be pointed at us particularly? You know, like all of our
We're just
all
a-
of
we're
our
just a
all of
little
our stuff
dot.
that we emit, you know, like radio waves and all that stuff. We've only been doing that for 100 years,
Yeah.
right? So even if stuff travels at the speed of light, it's only going, you know, 100 years away by now. So
Yeah.
Well, I think of Futurama, like with the they had some aliens on there that like they were getting like episodes of
Yes.
Ally McBeal.
Ally-
And but it was 1,000 years after they had originally aired.
Okay.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
yeah.
That's just one way, like one way I want
Exactly.
to put it.
Yeah. Well, sorry to get all sciencey on you
No,
guys.
No,
that's
no,
my
this is
theory
great.
on the multiverse.
I love getting sciencey, man.
Like this is only my second time on Philosophical Bones, and I have fun every single time.
Well,
Yeah, it's a lot
third
of fun.
time.
It is my third time.
Yeah, third
It is
time.
my third time. But it's fun. It's I really like thinking about the fact of like we're not the only life in the universe, because it's like
Well, I want to bring it back to the question is like on a multiversal scale, we're definitely not.
definitely not.
Yeah.
Definitely not. Definitely.
And it would be cool one day if we end up gaining the technology to maybe, get into the multiverse.
Yeah.
It'd be extremely difficult. I think you pointed out like about how far away these multiverses would be to try to travel to.
Yeah. Conventional speed, I don't think we could ever do it. But as far as
speed of light is the speed limit of the universe.
Right, exactly. So, but I mean, as far as maybe like some sort of warping technology or something, I think that might be really the only possibility.
God, but even then we'd have to travel at like a super crazy warp speed to get there.
Well, I mean, as far as like actually bending space,
We'd have to have the Millennium Falcon.
No.
Or
Well, there are theories out there about warp drive actually could happen. Like we could do it.
Well, ion drive is the closest thing that.
Yeah,
we
that's
have.
that's probably the next big innovation with space travel is ion drive.
Yeah,
But they do say but NASA's actually looked at warp drive and they've said it is actually we could do it. It's just figuring out everything about it.
Right.
But we could get there one day.
Really?
I hope so.
Real good question, Nick. Real
Yeah,
good question.
but yeah, in the end, just a little one-word answer: is there such thing as a multiverse,
I
or
would
as the
say-
multiverse?
I would. Rufus Villain has to say yes.
I would argue yes.
And I would also have to agree, yes. So this.
Well, thank you for bringing me back on the show.
Oh, of
for
course.
another time,
No,
man.
this is good to have this, and I love getting all the science from Josh.
Yeah, dude.
Thanks,
I
Nick.
love
It was
getting it.
fun.
I
He
love
did
getting,
that in 2 hours, dude.
I love getting the science.
Yeah, he did
Like
that in
I'm a
2
huge
hours.
science person. I love hearing that shit because I
Yeah.
love learning about it. But anyway, yeah, this is it's been Philosophical Bones. Question number 7: is there such a thing as multiverse? And we all agree there is.
There is.
Yes.
So in closing, keep thinking.
Keep thinking.